African Tales by Bibe.
Ojadili was a warrior of the ancient Igbo tribe in southeastern Nigeria, Western Africa. He was a renowned warrior. He was compared to the Iroko tree because of his height and strength. He could pull down giant palm trees and throw spears to the farthest distance and never miss a target. During intercommunal wars, Ojadili finished off the invaders at the fastest speed and was the one whose name was sung as the best. And when Odumodu, the lion maneater, raged into the village of Oba, eating up a hunter going home after the day's work, Ojadili was the one who accosted Odumodu in his lair and killed it with bare hands, bringing the body back to the king. Ojadili won so many of the wrestling games during the quarterly games that he gave up the sport to allow others have fun. He wanted a more daring adventures. One evening, 3 women ran back to the village in tears. The men were troubled by their tears and asked them what the problem could be. The 3 women narrated with tears how Ozodingba, the notorious gorilla, harassed them sexually in the forest. Everyone was stunned. Ozodingba was known to harass women and men on their way to the farm, taking their food, but to be interested in sex with the women of Oba was a horror they wouldn't accept. The next day, Ozodingba kidnapped a woman bathing at the stream. Eyewitnesses ran home to tell the tale. They couldn't forget the woman's terrified scream as Ozodingba lifted her on his shoulder and hurried into the thickets. The best hunters were sent to tackle the gorilla, and none of them came home alive. The Oba village lost 15 of its best hunters. It was time to call Ojadili. The king, Akaezi, summoned the warrior, and he came to the palace with his piper called Odunze. Odunze was the one who played the flute for Ojadili during wars, eulogizing him to cheer him to victory. The king and his elders explained the situation to Ojadili and exhorted him to decimate Ozodingba as quickly as possible. Gladly, Ojadili took up the job. Early the next morning, he departed for the forest with his piper, intent on catching the gorilla and, if possible, recover the kidnapped woman. The battle between Ozodingba and Ojadili was a tough one, as both of them were heavyweight and could match each other's strength equally. Odunze played his pipe to the best of his ability, praising his master in all imaginable warrior names. Eventually, Ojadili threw Ozodingba to the ground. Then he snapped the gorilla's neck without mercy. His piper was beside himself with joy. He danced and played his pipe to the glory of Ojadili. Ojadili searched for the kidnapped woman, but couldn't find her in the gorilla's enclave or surroundings. He hoped she made an escape. Time would tell. Ojadili came home with Ozodingba's head and presented it to the king and the elders. They praised his prowess and threw a party for him. The legend of Ojadili had spread far and wide and had reached the land of the spirits, breaking through the screen of opaque smoke that separated the people of the living land and the people of the Spiritland. An invitation came to Ojadili through a black owl messenger to come to the Spiritland and fight a battle with the best of their warriors. This news filled Ojadili with great pleasure, for he had conquered all the men in the land of the living. His challenge was the people on the other side, and he was sure to conquer them. The king and the people of Oba told Ojadili not to honor the devilish invitation. The women wept because their pride was about to embark on a journey of suicide. But Ojadili had a different view. He was glad for the opportunity. Even his piper was as enthusiastic as his master. He sang several songs in honor of Ojadili and bragged on how they would conquer the monsters of the Spiritland. Ojadili and his piper reached the boundary of the land of the living and that of the Spiritland on horseback, but could only move into the wall of smoke by foot because their horses threw them off and galloped off in fear. As they treaded the Spiritland covered in the cloud of opaque smoke, Ojadili refused to be intimidated despite the horrendous cries emanating from within the land. Eventually, the smoke cleared, and Ojadili and his piper found themselves in a broad prairie, dark with the sky in the color of deep purple. Gradually, huge men came out from several cracks in the ground and began to yell war songs. Ojadili stood his ground, and without ado, Odunze began to cheer his master, playing the most beautiful tunes he knew. The spirits made a ring around them, singing their hoarse war songs, taunting Ojadili, telling him to show his prowess. The first warrior to fight Ojadili came forward. He was taller and mightier than Ojadili, and he had the body of a rock. It didn't take Ojadili time, and he toppled the spirit warrior to the ground, snapping his head. The spirits roared in shock and fury, but controlled themselves. Odunze was fueled by his master's success, so he increased the tone of his pipe. The second spirit warrior was a two-headed being, angry that his fellow had been killed in a matter of few maneuvers. The crowd cheered him, and Odunze hailed his warrior master. Eventually, Ojadili threw this two-headed being and snapped his two heads. The crowd sighed with huge disappointment, and without delay, a three-headed monster barged from the crowd and lunged at Ojadili. Ojadili was ready, as he was aware that more would come for him. And with the next aggressor, the burden was greater. Slowly, Ojadili's strength began to ebb, and he got weaker by the second. Yet he managed to kill all his aggressors to the one with 5 monstrous heads. By now, Odunze was frenzied with euphoria and excitement. His music was more pungent, piercing. The being with 6 heads thundered into the arena, standing like a mighty tree with several branches. The spectators roared with joy. Amongst the crowd were people with different horrific formations, ranging from 3-eyed men to triple-legged people. Ojadili didn't acknowledge them in any way and didn't feel intimidated. However, fighting a hydra-headed man was not something every warrior encounters, even in a lifetime. This battle was not easy for Ojadili. Every move he made was captured by one of the heads, and he was thwarted. Ojadili had to attack the monster's manhood, and in that diversion was able to throw him to the ground, snapping the major head with a swiftness that gave the monster no time to recover. Snapping the rest of the heads was a feat only Ojadili could achieve, for the being roared and struggled to get free. Without giving him a moment of rest, the being with 7 monstrous heads crawled out from a hole that suddenly appeared behind Ojadili. Ojadili found himself being dragged by the legs into the ground. Before he knew what was happening, Ojadili found himself in a dark underground, with so many eyes in the dark watching him and his aggressors. Now, fighting in the dark was a strategy this monster wanted to use to conquer Ojadili. Odunze didn't waste time. He jumped into the large hole, playing his pipe with heightened zeal, exalting Ojadili in heroic words, encouraging him to finish off this 7-headed monster, come what may. The battle raged, and Ojadili was able to adjust his eyes to the dark space. A no-weapon fight was not something won easily, but Ojadili kept calm despite the din around him, cayent to destabilize him. The weight of this monster was so much that he nearly threw Ojadili. However, the human warrior seemed to be equipped with extra strength and penetrating eyes. Taking the monster by surprise, Ojadili flung a huge amount of sand in the frontal eyes of the being, and while he was screaming, trying to turn around to see better, Ojadili launched a more vicious attack on his chest, hitting him down with his legs. The death of the 7-headed monster was the final straw which the spectators never expected, as he was their last hope of conquering the much-acclaimed human warrior. Many of them wept, and Ojadili quickly jumped out of the hole, quickly followed by his piper. Just as they were about to escape the angry mob, Ojadili and Odunze were obstructed by a muscular dwarf who barred their way. Ojadili laughed as he saw the dwarf wondering what he was up to. Odunze didn't laugh. He stared at the dwarf, then back to Ojadili. The piper told his master not to engage the dwarf in any fight, else it will be his death. Ojadili laughed scornfully and told him not to be silly. He had just killed 7 monsters with several heads. What was it with this dwarf? Odunze told him that the dwarf was his chi, meaning his personal spirit who had come to tempt his humility. Ojadili disregarded the advice and moved forward. He grabbed the dwarf and flung him out of the way. The dwarf disappeared in mid-air. At that moment, Ojadili slumped to the ground and died. Scared to death, Odunze ran away, running through the thick smoke of the boundary to escape with his life, for so many of the spirits were running to capture not only the fallen Ojadili, but his piper too. Odunze escaped into the land of the living by a hair's breadth. Weeping, he ran home, playing a mournful tune as the villagers gathered, wailing for their beloved warrior, Ojadili. Meanwhile, the spirits had taken Ojadili to burn him at a stake in preparation to devour his flesh. But while they were busy jubilating their success of capturing the human who had humiliated them, a giant eagle loyal to Ojadili flew in and jacked the warrior up, flying into the sky. All the yells and shouts of the spirits, including their arrow shots, couldn't get down the eagle or Ojadili. The eagle flew across the opaque smoke and dropped Ojadili into the Oba River, where he woke up with a start. Ojadili swam out of the river and headed home in staggering steps, for indeed, he was down. While Odunze was playing his melancholic tunes, tears coursing down his cheeks, Ojadili arrived at the village square, falling to the ground in sheer exhaustion. There was an uproar of joy as the people danced and rejoiced. His loved ones hugged him and the women danced. Their warrior is back. The men celebrated him and lifted Ojadili high. Then they took him to the house of the medicine man for treatment and full recovery.
Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It will encourage us to bring you more interesting stories. See you in the next video and stay safe.